Hi, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about deeds. And a deed is just a document that transfers the title of a property from one person to another. There are many different types of deeds, and today we're going to be talking about them for estate planning purposes. So welcome to the Wake Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Alejandra Moreno.
And I'm Taylor Kaufman.
Thanks for joining us. So let's talk a little bit about deeds, which usually they're called quitclaim deeds. But it's just a deed, right? So you want to talk about kind of how a deed works?
Right. So typically on a deed, it's a document that transfers real property from one person to another person. And we'll get into it. There's many different kinds of deeds, some that transfer the property now and later. But I think the main terms in a deed is the grantor. So that's someone that owns a property that's transferring the property to someone else. And the grantee is the person that's receiving the property. But I think the main topic of our conversation today would be, or part of it is going to be the language in these deeds, right, for estate planning purposes.
That's right. So depending on certain magical words, a deed can send you straight to probate, or it can avoid probate completely. So if we go back to law school, and I remember in property law learning these terms and having no idea what they actually meant. But you have deeds between a husband and wife, or what's called tenants by the entirety. And that means both husband and wife own the property 100%. So if one passes away, the other one automatically owns the property. There are people that buy a property together, and they might not be married when they buy the property. That is called tenants in common. And that, instead of both of them owning 100%, they own 50-50. So if one person passes away, their 50% has to go to probate to be transferred to their beneficiaries. And then when the second one passes away, the same thing happens.
Okay.
There are those magical words, the joint tenants with right of survivorship, where you don't have to be married, but it makes that same bond where all of the parties own the property 100%. And basically the last man standing keeps the property. So if you have a deed, joint tenants with right of survivorship, a bunch of siblings, and one passes away, the remaining siblings continue to own that property without having to go through probate.
Right.
But we've seen so many cases of people that don't have those magical words. And they're like, but I'm on the title to the property. Why do I have to go through probate? It's like, well, you know, that's the reason why.
Yeah. And on that note, I think it's important to consult an attorney that really knows, these kinds of deeds, to make sure that the deed or the document that you're paying for, or that you think you're drafting up, is really conveying what you want it to convey. If you want someone to have the joint rights with tenants of survivorship, what kind of rights or what property interest you want someone to have when you pass. I think it's very important.
And a lot of people don't know those magical words. A lot of people, we see deeds, and as soon as we look at them, we know if it was prepared by a estate planning attorney, or if it was a Google form, or somebody was like, I don't need an attorney, I can just go to the last deed and copy it, and then it doesn't have the right effect. Right?
Yeah.
One of the fun deeds, I guess, or has a fun name at least, the Ladybird deed.
Yes.
It's actually called a life estate deed, and we'll get into that. But that's a great estate planning tool for many cases, and it can avoid probate if done properly.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people throw around the term like Ladybird deed instead of estate planning documents, and I know you've had some experience with that, so
yeah,
shed some light on that.
Definitely. People just kind of Google Ladybird deed, and they don't really know what it means. So it's actually a life estate deed with a remainder. So you in that deed are going to transfer the property to yourself for your life. And when you pass away, it's almost like adding beneficiaries to your property. When you pass away, instead of your property going through probate, it's going to automatically go to your remainderman. There are a few different types of Ladybird deeds. So there's a Ladybird deed, just that, where you have your remainderman. But again, if you don't have the magical words, which makes it an enhanced life estate deed, what we've seen is just a regular Ladybird deed without the proper language. And then this person, they're like, okay, I have my kids as beneficiaries, but I can't afford this property anymore, or I want to take out a mortgage, or I want to sell it. And they can't, because the way the deed was structured, they don't have that power without the consent of their remainderman.
Right.
And we've seen it cause family issues because, the owner of the property wants to sell it. And, most of the kids are fine with it. But there's that one kid that's like, no, I wanted to inherit that when you die.
Yeah.
So I'm not signing anything.
Yeah.
And it's not that they're stuck. There's legal recourse, right? They can file what's called a partition action. But you're basically suing your family to force the sale, and you're still not going to get the value of the property. Now it has to be distributed. You're going to spend a bunch of money. It's
attorney fees. Yeah, it's not it kind of defeats the purpose of having this fancy deed drafted up if it's not doing what you want it to do. And, on the same topic of remainderment, we've seen a lot of people adding their minor children as the remainder. So once they pass, the minor children would take over the property, and that's a big issue and topic.
Yes, we had a case not too long ago where a parent added their minors as remaindermen, and then for whatever reason they wanted to sell the property. But as we talked about on previous podcasts, minors don't have the capacity to sign legal documents. Yeah. So they put the minor on without their consent, and now they want to sell the property. How are they going to do that? We had to open up a guardianship case, get that parent appointed as guardian to sign all of the closing documents to be able to sell the property. And then a portion had to go to the minor. So the portion sat in a guardianship for many years while we were just waiting for them to turn 18. And then technically that money goes to them. They don't want to give it back. Then this parent just bought a property and they're kind of stuck. Right?
Yeah, no, it's a big issue. And, it's the language in the deed can make all the difference, right? It can either send you straight to probate court or a guardianship, or it can really just make, avoid everything court interference, having anyone else consent if you want to sell the property or mortgage the property. So the language in these deeds are really important.
It exposes people to a lot of liability and a lot of headaches in the future if it's not done properly. Mm-hmm. So we want to make sure that the Ladybird deed that we create, yes, avoids probate. You're adding your beneficiaries, but I always tell clients, we want to make sure it's your property until it's not.
Right.
Until you pass away, right?
Yeah,
basically. But we want to make sure that you have the flexibility to, if you have to take out a mortgage, if you have to take out a reverse mortgage, if you want to sell it, you retire, you're on a fixed income, you can no longer afford, especially in South Florida, the property taxes. Yeah. And, it wasn't drafted properly, so now you're stuck. That's avoidable, as we always say. That's avoidable.
Yeah, and I think that's another reason why we, wanted to get on the podcast and talk about this topic, because it is avoidable. And as guardianships and probate attorneys, we've seen bad deeds. We've seen people come in, no, I had someone draft it up, I did this deed, it's perfect, it's bulletproof, and we, kind of seen that on the other end of the spectrum. So, when a client comes to us and they want us to just do a deed, or we recommend a deed to avoid probate or guardianships, we really know what language to add in there.
Absolutely. I mean, bulletproof is kind of a dirty word for us, right? Because nothing is bulletproof. Yes. But no, you're absolutely right. And there are, so many attorneys that just focus on one of these areas of law. They just do estate planning. They just do guardian. But because we're on both sides of the coin, it's not like we draft a deed and then we never see the repercussions. We've seen people draft deeds incorrectly, and then we've had to deal with the guardianship case, and we have to be the bearers of bad news. Well, we reviewed the title commitment. You want to sell this property, and this is why now you need a guardianship. Yeah. It's an added expense, and it's not fair for the the person that did this deed, because it's not having the effect they wanted, and technically their money, because the minor doesn't have money, their money's going to be locked up until this kid turns 18 when we can finally release it. So it's a mess.
Yes, to say the least.
Yeah. So you have to be very careful. That you're going to an attorney who's asking the right questions, why you want to add these beneficiaries, their state, if they're married, if they have any financial issues. We want to make sure that especially if it's your homestead, that is protected.
Yes.
Right? Because a lot of us, we work our whole lives to have that. So we want to make sure it's protected. We want to make sure it's done properly, and that the client knows all of the risks of, what has to be included in order for their wishes to be, spelled out.
Of course. Yeah. Very important topic.
Yeah. So a lot of people like talking about Ladybird deeds. We love talking about Ladybird deeds. We think it's a great estate planning tool for certain situations. For some situations, it's just not feasible. We recommend other documents. But yeah, thanks for joining us talking about deeds. We hope that you will like and follow along, and we'll see you next time here on The Wake from ASM Law Group, preserving what matters most for those who matter most. Thank you.
Thank you.
The Wake is for informational purposes only and does not constitute legal advice. The discussions in this podcast are meant to bring awareness to important issues, but they should not be considered a substitute for professional legal guidance. If you need legal advice tailored to your specific situation, please consult a qualified attorney.